And I am going to ask Megan to share her screen. One second. I'm gonna open the presentation on my computer as well, so I can do double duty. Just one second. I'll just remind everyone to mute your phones or mute your Zoom, so any background noise. All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Third in a series of what will be 4 workshops. We're very grateful that you're able to take some time out of your evening in the holiday season to join us while we're working on our regional plan. So my name is Sam Gold, and I'm the Executive Director of RiverCOG. And I'm joined tonight by a number of members of RiverCOG staff, of our Regional Planning Committee, and members of the public, you. Thank you. Before we get started, I'm going to invite our RPC chair, Frank DeFelice, to say a few words if you'd like.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Sam. Good evening, everyone. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Frank DeFelice, and for the past 5 years, I've had the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Regional Planning Committee, also known as the RPC. Perhaps the most important responsibility of the RPC is the creation of the Regional Plan of Conservation and Development for our 17-town region. And on behalf of the more than 24 RPC members that represent each of your towns, many of whom are on the call tonight, I want to express our thanks to you for participating in part 1 of this 2-part workshop dedicated to mapping for the Regional Plan of Conservation and Development. It's reasonable to ask, why the emphasis on mapping? Well, mapping allows us to better understand the needs and preferences of each of our 17 member towns so that we can identify goals that fulfill these needs and respect their unique preferences. Sometimes arriving at an optimum solution requires communication and collaboration between many shareholders, and here, using maps as a visualization tool aids in effective communication. Remember that this plan will be both a plan of conservation and development, and here mapping allows us to identify the areas where development is preferable, as well as the areas where conservation is preferable. Finally, mapping is of regional significance because there will surely be areas of interest that cross our municipal borders and boundaries. Now, shortly, we're going to ask you to meet with your local land use commissioners and with the public to review and discuss maps that you will be able to mark up. And then, without being too parcel specific, so to speak, you'll perhaps identify areas where your town has existing utility infrastructure, such as natural gas or sewers or city water, and areas where you would like these utilities expanded to facilitate future development. Also, areas where your town would like to see new development, such as industrial parks, shopping centers, or attainable housing built. Areas of historic preservation or cultural features or agricultural areas, and areas where land conservation and recreation for, say, parks and trails would be appropriate. Following tonight's workshop, the Regional Planning Committee is hopeful that you will return for the second half of this meeting on mapping for the Regional Plan of Conservation and Development, and that you will continue to participate in the development of our regional plan, sharing your thoughts and concerns, communicating issues that are important to you, and critiquing our work, as well as identifying those goals that will help define and improve our towns and our region during the next 10 years and beyond. And I just want to close with recognition of the work that's done behind the scenes. Anything like this is a very, very large scale project, and there are many people involved. But the work that's being done by RiverCOG staff, and particularly Megan Juflis and Sam Gold, and also from FHI, Francesco Gomes, is really yeoman's work. There's all of these little details, little questions that need to be answered every day. And Megan's probably sick and tired of me asking questions, and Sam is too, but we do that, and we do that well. And I'd like to recognize the work that they're doing, as well as the RPC members. So with that, I'll turn the presentation back to you, Sam, and thank you everyone for participating tonight.
And thank you, Frank, for those kind words. I forgot to introduce Megan Juflis and Francisco Gomes. They are our two project managers. Megan is our senior planner, and Francisco Gomes is with Fitzgerald and Halliday, who is our consultant on the project. So next slide, Megan. All right. As with the last two workshops, which many of you attended, we'll begin with a little bit of background. If I repeat information, just bear with me because we do have a couple of new people who are joining us for the first time. So welcome. We're here this evening because the RiverCOG and the Regional Planning Committee, the RPC, and FHI are working together on our first regional plan of conservation and development, the RPOCD for the region. The RPOCD is a visionary policy document that sets goals and makes recommendations regarding preferred land uses, development patterns, and types, and desirable areas for conservation based on existing and emerging regional trends and challenges. Back during the summer, we held regional introductory meetings where we went over the overview of what this project is. We followed that with meetings with each of our 17 municipal planning and zoning commissions. You can find the recordings of all those meetings on our project website, rivercogregionalplan.org. So if you want to get up to speed on what your town planning commission said to us, or you want to see that introduction presentation, or the previous two workshops, the first one on changing demographics and the second one on regional visioning and branding, you can see those recordings and watch them at your leisure from our website. We've also, in the background, been working on an existing conditions report. Megan has brought that together, and that will be coming out shortly, early in the new year. That will be a public document that compiles statistical data on current trends and key issues in the region, and it will be a basis for a lot of recommendations that will be in the region, and we think it'll be very useful to your towns. With the information we gathered so far, we began a series of 4 regional thematic meetings or virtual workshops. And after this, we'll have one more. And as always, you can go to the project website. And tonight's workshop is the first of 2 in our mapping series. We will be giving you some background information on future land use maps and previewing the exercise we will be giving you at the next and final workshop. So next slide, Megan. I think this slide is going to be Francisco Gomes. So Francisco, take over.
All right, thank you, Sam. So as Sam mentioned, this evening's really intended to be a primer on land use planning and future land use planning more specifically. And so our approach to this is going to be to really introduce you to the value of this process and of land use planning and mapping, and then provide you with some examples of what that looks like in different regions and at different scales. And then we'll explain to you how part B of this workshop will work and what we're looking for you in the interim, and then talk about some technology that we're working on our end to help facilitate the process. All right, so with that said, the future land use map is really important in Connecticut specifically because the state mandates both towns and regions to develop a map, and that map acts as the basis for your land use regulations such as zoning. And it can identify a number of geographies and a number of land uses for those geographies: housing development, economic development, agriculture, conservation, public open space and institutional land uses, transportation corridors and transportation links like train stations, bus stations, and other land uses as well. Okay, thank you. As I mentioned, this map and the process is as valuable as the map itself, because the process really challenges us to to think about our land use, to do the research that we need to do to develop the map, and to have the conversations around land use that are represented by the map. And so, as I mentioned, it's the basis for your zoning regulations. All zoning regulations in this state, if they are ever challenged, the Plan of Conservation and Development's land use map is really one of the first documents or pieces of evidence that's used to support or refute a town zoning regulations. It also provides the basis for economic development plans, open space and conservation plans, transportation plans, capital improvement plans. It can be submitted as part of a grant application package to show that whatever project it is consistent with the vision of the community or the region. And so this is a very important map. And I want to go back to the idea about the process being just as important and maybe more important in some respects. Okay, next slide. The future land use map can vary quite a bit in detail and emphasis, and that can be evidenced by looking at maps for different communities or regions. And so to give you a sense for how they can vary and what that looks like, we've provided some very different examples for you. First, we'll start kind of close to home and take a look at the 4th Regional Plan Map, which is a map for the New York metropolitan area produced by the Regional Plan Agency. We will then take a look at SC-COG's, your neighboring regions, their regional plan map. And then we'll bounce around a little bit. Megan provided a fantastic example from San Diego, where she had previously worked, of San Diego's general plan map. An example that I found in Texas, which I think provides a very good example of a very simple map, but one that is centered around with a very strong transportation focus. So we have that as well. Camden, New Jersey, where we have done work in the past, and one of our colleagues worked on their project. They have a land use vision map that is a very high level broad brush approach. And then finally, we'll give you an idea of what a working map looks like from Richmond, Vermont, and their future land use concept plan. All right, so the 4th Regional Plan Association, and I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this particular document or report, or the preceding one, the 3rd Regional Plan that was released about 20 years ago. But it's a wonderfully visionary document that covers an incredibly diverse and significantly, economically significant and geographically spread region, and that being metropolitan New York and Connecticut, and a good part of Connecticut is represented within this particular study area. So their map, and we're looking at it, and if you were to zoom in detail, it would make a little more sense to you. But they have 6 basic elements to their what they call their 2040 map. So it's effectively their future land use map. And that includes nature, coastline, transportation, population, jobs, and places of interest. And of course, these things overlay. And their map is reflective of that. So I think what this demonstrates is that you can do this type of mapping for a very large region and come up with a vision that communicates the story. In the case of metropolitan New York and the RPA's plan, it shows the areas where it's important to concentrate and continue economic development. And it distinguishes that from the areas that are more important for conservation or maybe for their function as part of a shoreline. And all of that, of course, is, and this is particularly relevant in the case of New York, is centered around transportation and the region's transit infrastructure. And of course, the reason why Connecticut and Long Island and New Jersey are an important piece of this map is because they have commuter rail infrastructure that extends into New Jersey and Long Island and Connecticut that helps define the region. So this is starting very zoomed out in a very complicated region. But if we go to the next slide, right next door, this is something far more similar for very obvious reasons to your region and to the extent of what we'll be looking at in this effort. Now, that being said, SCCOG took a really interesting approach, and they really simplified things by just taking a look at intensity of land use and developing classes based more or less on intensity, with the exception of institutional use. It's kind of unique. So they have high intensity land uses, institutional land uses, which would be schools and municipal land uses and open and public parks, and then low, medium intensities land use, and then open space, just open lands. I think, and we'll get in this in detail, we have a slightly different approach we'd like to take, but this gives you a sense that there's a lot of approaches you could take, and the most important part of this is that there's a rational process, and that we go through the process, and that we document the process. And that is exactly what this map does and represents. All right, next slide. This is an example from San Diego. And San Diego calls their land use map their general plan land use map. And their plan is very tied to their existing land use. And one of the reasons being is because they're a metropolitan area that's largely built out, and they're taking a very strong infill development approach. So in the areas where they have commercial land use, they would like to continue commercial land use, and where they have open space, they would like to preserve that open space. And where they have agriculture, they want to continue agriculture. But their map is very traditional in that sense. It has these traditional land use categories, and it demonstrates the transportation network that connects all of that. And so I think it's a great example. And when you take a look at the region that this represents, while much of it is San Diego proper, the size of the region and the scale of the region now in California is probably comparable to the RiverCOG region. Okay, next example. This example I mentioned from Texas, and this is from a small community north of the Dallas area. They are very oriented along, and this is common in Texas. Everything is highway oriented, and Texas has their own state highways as well. And so this is oriented along Route 281. And to a lesser degree on a state route that crosses through the center of Clear Falls here. Similar to the San Diego example, they develop land use classes, and this really spells out where those land uses should occur and how they're oriented along the transportation network. And I think this map is likely similar to the level of detail that we might consider using in our map. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to provide it as an example. It came out of a research document on best practices in land use planning that I was reviewing. So once again, another example. In this case, we're dealing with a region that's it's a town in the greater area, so a region that's smaller, or an area that's smaller than your region. All right, our next example comes from Camden, New Jersey. And as I mentioned before, this is a very broad brush approach, and it's clearly not parcel specific. It deals with areas and corridors. And this map is really intended to communicate ideas, and more importantly, it's linked to policies. So within their plan, they first developed a set of policies, and we're taking a similar approach with themes, but a set of policies. And then they use this map to communicate where those policies are a priority. And so if we go to the next page, which is the legend for the map, we can see they have policies such as growth areas and conservation. And these are very traditional land use categories or policies. So they should all look very familiar. Transit centers, suburban centers, Main Street corridors. But they also have some interesting categories such as resilient landscapes. Those are areas that are either vulnerable or need extra or need resiliency with respect to flooding. And then also innovation hub is something that it really coincides with the discussion that we have, the idea of innovation, identifying areas for innovation. And that's one of the policies and one of the features on the map. And once again, it provides a great model, I think something similar to our approach and how we would like to connect ideas or themes with our map and get away from the idea of a very traditional land use map, which individually your towns are providing. We could have just assembled all of your individual town POCD land use and future land use maps, but that doesn't provide a regional vision. That provides a tapestry of visions. And we're really interested in taking a very high level regional approach to this. And I think this type of approach does very well at doing that. Okay, next. And then finally, this is what a working map looks like. And this came out of a planning process for Richmond, Vermont. And we did some work up in that area, some visioning for them, not this particular project, some visioning for a village center. And this shows you how this process starts. And in sometimes this can be a very effective final product because it communicates the big ideas that we have. In this case, natural and working lands that we want to protect. And in the case of Richmond, Vermont, a working land is a farm, a forested land, for logging, that sort of thing. Villages, commercial areas, and then the flood sensitive areas as well, the flood hazard overlay areas along here, which is particularly relevant to the RiverCOG region. So that gives you an idea of the range and scale of what's possible. And so, we're at the point where we don't want to be too stuck with any particular detail in how we go about developing ideas and representing them on the map. I think we all have confidence that that's going to come together through this process. And what's most important is that we liberate you and free you up and give you the agency to put your ideas on paper and what you've learned on paper and what you know on paper, or in this case, on screen, and take those ideas and put them down in a physical form on a map. And that's the value of this process. Okay, next. All right, so once again, this evening is really designed as a primer to start thinking about this, to discuss and present to you how we would like to approach it, and to show you the examples that I just showed you. What we are working on for you is we are working to develop an interactive map so that you can go online, pan around, zoom, that has base map information such as transportation corridors and local streets and town centers, etc., that you can draw on and record your observations and make notes. And so in that way, we hope it's going to be very accessible to you and maybe overcome some of our early ideas about distributing to you like a PDF or a paper map that you would mark up, simply because it allows you to zoom in, zoom out, and really get into detail if you want to see some detail, and zoom back out if you don't need it. We are still working on that technology. And so the time between now and our next meeting will allow us to get that online for you and have it ready for you to demonstrate it at our next meeting. So at the next workshop, we'll show you how that works. And we'll show you what kind of information and how to provide information on the map. And really, for the most part, it's going to be up to you. We're going to give you some guidelines of what we would like to get out of it, but we don't want to restrict you too much. It helps that we're all taking more or less the same approach, but we know there's going to be particular areas that as individuals you're far more interested in, whether it's a geographic area or an issue or a land use or an environmental concern or an economic development concern. And we want to free you up to document that as you best can. So following our next workshop, you will then have the homework assignment, and we'll apply a certain deadline to it, and for you to document online, and in order to get it back to us. And then we won't need a subsequent meeting following that, but I still need to work this out with Sam and Megan. We'll then look to compile all that in some way to share with you, so you could see what everyone else was thinking as well. And we've got to figure that out, but I think that's our intention. All right, next slide. Okay, Megan, you want to get into some detail about what we'll be looking at on our map and what we'll be trying to document?
Yeah, thanks. So once we've established this interactive mapping tool, we're going to be asking you, as Francisco alluded, we're going to be asking you to identify some key features for us. And of course, we're going to go over these again at the next workshop, but we wanted to send you away with kind of some descriptions of what we were going to be asking you for, so that over the holiday, when you have some free time and free brain space, you can be mulling these over. So the first thing we're going to be asking you to identify is what we're calling town centers. And first, I want to point out this may be a bit of a misnomer, because there can be more than one or none in any given town, and they don't necessarily have to be in the center. But what we're looking for in particular are areas where you'd like to see an integration of residential, commercial, employment, and civic uses. And these will be areas that are pedestrian-friendly activity hubs that are inviting spaces with accessible streets that emphasize the community character. So next, we'll also be looking for what we're calling innovation development areas. And these are areas where you would like to see industrial, commercial service, or commercial retail uses, or some combination or mixture of these. And the focus here is on areas for employment or business generating uses. So we'll be tying our built environment to our region's economic development. Then we're also going to be asking you to identify housing opportunity areas. So we heard from you at the last several workshops that our region needs more affordable housing. And we also heard from you that we have a lot of attainable housing that maybe A, doesn't qualify as statutorily affordable, or B, might not be the right fit for a diversity of residents, like single person households, younger residents, older residents, or non-family households. So this category is kind of meant to encapsulate all of these things. We're looking for areas that you would like to see us target for a mixture of housing types that are suitable for households of various sizes and various income levels. So this could be apartments, condos, townhomes, duplexes, or even just single family houses on smaller lots. So by planning for a diversity of housing types, we can create an economically and socially diverse community. There'll also be an opportunity for you to identify areas for utility expansion, as Frank alluded to at the beginning of the meeting. These areas may be for extended sewer, public water, gas, internet, cellular, or fiber optics. Of course, we recognize some of these areas are going to overlap. So if you identify an area for, say, innovation development or housing opportunity that doesn't already have any necessary utilities, you are obviously also kind of in effect identifying those areas for utility expansion. But we're also including this as a standalone element in case there are other areas that don't coincide that you're thinking of as well. And then we're also going to be asking you to identify connections. So these are key links between important land use designations. We heard at our previous meetings, all of the municipal meetings and our previous workshops, that our region needs better connectivity. So here we're giving you an opportunity to identify locations for sidewalks, bike paths, transit connections, etc., to help us better connect everything that our region has to offer. And by focusing on a variety of mode choices for these connections, we can also help to meet the needs of a diverse group of users. And finally, we'll have an other category, and this will be your opportunity to call out any other ideas that you think are important that maybe we haven't listed here. So this might be important agricultural land, or it might be important preservation areas or parks, etc. Anything that you think is important. And so again, I want to remind you that we will be going over all of these things at the next meeting, so you don't have to worry about, memorizing them or that you'll forget or whatnot. But we just want you to be thinking about them between now and then. And since we are going into the holidays and we are assuming that you're going to have lots of time to think about all of these things, we have a couple of other things we'd like you to think about. Start thinking about what you want a future land use map to look like for our region, what you hope our future land use map will help achieve for the region. We'd like you to take a look at your town's future land use map and POCD, see what you think about that, if it sparks any ideas, if you agree or disagree. And we suggest you bring this topic up with your friends and family over your holiday Zoom, because it'll be so much fun. and finally, we would like you to share this presentation with as many people as you know and make it go viral. And with that, I want to open it up to any questions or discussion topics for the group.
So,
Thank you, Meg. Go ahead, Frank.
This is Frank. I just want to say thank you, and that's great that we would, that people could bring this up and talk to their families who often live in the same town or the same or next town over. So that's a great point. One thing I will remind everyone is that while your first inclination would be to look at your own hometown, and certainly, that's expected and desirable, you'll also be able to look at all of the other towns in the region. So if you say live in Durham and you know something that would be appropriate in Middletown or Portland, those are RiverCOG towns, and you would be able to also make your comments and enter those into the interactive tool as well.
And I'll just add one additional comment or clarification is that we want you to have the in the next few weeks, think about this, have conversations with people you know in town and your contacts, but also and take a look at what your town plan has for its future land use map. But also remember that you're not bound to that POCD future land use map in this process. The regional plan future land use map is a visionary land use plan, and we can do things here that you might not be able to do in your local town POCD map, and it's meant to be at a scale that's not as exact as your municipal POCD future land use map. So there's no requirement that the maps are verbatim the same. There may be ideas that you have that you want to bring forth that maybe in conflict with your town POCD. Everyone's ideas are welcome here for consideration. And because the towns are going to use this map a little differently, they're going to use it as a reference. We're trying to encourage all of our towns to be working towards common goals and addressing common issues. We don't expect this map to be 100% the same as your town maps. So this is the place for bigger ideas on a bigger scale. So with that, I see Beth Emery has a question. Go ahead. Just unmute, you're muted. Unmute yourself first and then go ahead.
Yes, I'm just wondering if you could clarify, or maybe you said it and I missed it. Are the maps going to be hot linked and available as as layered maps, in the completed document or only in the working documents that you're going to send along to us?
So I'll first take a stab at it, and then I'll let Francisco to add to it. This is a tool. This is a tool for us to get input from you and also anyone else in the community who'd be interested in weighing in with ideas for a future land use map. Our intention is that people's submissions, we haven't made a final decision on this, but I don't think we're going to be making everyone's submissions public necessarily. These are inputs as we come to the RPC to make some decisions as to what this map looks like. These are the ideas that are being brought to us, along with our own research. So this is our attempt to get input from our communities. So the information we get from everyone who participates in this activity, that isn't our future land use map. We're taking that information and we're going to take into consideration everything that's brought to us, but ultimately it's going to be one of the data inputs that the RPC considers as part of the creation of the land use map. And yeah, go.
Yeah, and Beth, in case you're also thinking about the land use map that's presented within the plan as part of the plan and what that will look like. It's our intention for the plan itself, not to be like a hard copy document. It's certainly something you could print out if you wanted to, but we want to make it something that's an online and more interactive experience. And so to that effect, the map could be something online that you could turn layers on and off, you could zoom in, and it could be interactive in that nature, not just a static map.
Oh, okay. Yep. I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Beth. Other questions? Go ahead, Humphrey.
Sam, it's Humphrey Tyler.
Yep.
So my question relates to other entities, other either government or not-for-profit agencies, which are in one way or another involved in regional planning, and whether this process is going to bring them into our planning process for a regional map. And let me give you a couple of examples. Margot can probably speak more to this point, but I know that the Connecticut Audubon Society has designated an area of the eastern shore of the river as an important bird forest area. And it's a fairly large area that has been so designated. And so I'm wondering if this plan is going to bring that overlay into the planning process. Other examples I can think of are, chances are Connecticut DOT has some regional plans for how it would like to develop transportation in the area, both highways and mass transit. And possibly Connecticut Deep has some plans for conservation or for energy development, where key transmitters or energy connections should go. So I'm wondering if those plans that already exist out there or that are being developed are going to be brought into this process and used as overlays.
So I guess the answer to the question is yes, but I'm going to flip the question on you. Is that if you can provide us a link or a copy of that Audubon plan, that would be great as an input if you have access to that.
Sure.
Asking everyone who's participating in this process, whether you're on this Zoom meeting tonight, or you're watching the recording, or you as the participant tonight are reaching out to people. All those are great suggestions, and some of them we have a pretty good we have pretty good connections to DOT at RiverCOG, and we have copies of plans that might be relevant. The Audubon plan I don't have, so that would be very useful. Some of the other state agencies, we do have access, obviously, to the state plan of conservation development, but there's other stakeholders like DECD. We are relying on, because of the nature of this project as a regional project, we're relying on the participants in the process, our RPC steering committee, to bring those people in as much as possible, as much as they can. So when we do go to our public comment period, which is over 2 months, that hopefully we won't have someone say, "Oh, did you see such and such plan?" But if they do, that's the point of having having a public process is to catch those things. All right.
Sam, this is Mary. Are we gonna, I'm hoping we're gonna include the FEMA flood map as a base map on here as well, because I don't think, given global warming, that we want to encourage any development of those areas.
So I will let you into a little bit of the sausage making. Originally, we were going to roll out tonight the homework activity, but we felt that it would be potentially more useful and engaging if we were somehow, instead of being able to do these maps on paper, having an interactive ability to be able to record people's information. We're going to provide some guidance data layers for everyone to view, and FEMA flood maps is one of them.
Good, thank you.
And not to say that there should never be any development in FEMA flood zones ever again. There might be good reasons from time to time, but that I would see that as a clear recommendation that we should not be encouraging any new development in flood zones just because of the public safety risks. And yeah. But anyway, but that is something that we will make available, and also there'll be a few other data layer inputs that will be available in this tool. I saw a question from Alan Kravitz pop up, and it says, "What are the assumptions about existing trends, economic growth, and employment?" Okay, those are good. So we have from the demographics workshop, if you remember, there's a few. The population projections here is for a sort of stagnant and slight decline in population. Of course, as you know, Alan, population projections, don't necessarily, we're not bound to them by any means, and so we do have to make some assumptions here, and I think the RPC is going to be on their plate to provide some feedback as to what assumptions are they comfortable with. I think we could, in many ways, stage some recommendations based on various assumption scenarios. I think we all would like to see economic growth and an increase in employment, but those need to be coupled with a younger population and a growing workforce. So they go hand in hand. So I think that those are important things that we need to be thinking of. And I know you asked that question as a rhetorical question as well as a real question, but I think I'll throw it back to you, Alan, as to what assumptions you feel comfortable in a plan with a time horizon for 2030.
The answer is simple. I don't have confidence in any of the projections. I think that they have to be fundamentally questioned. And if we don't question them, and I don't think we can get answers, I would rather develop plans based on a set of alternate assumptions. That's to me, that's the variable that we have to take into account. I've been arguing this fundamentally since the beginning.
Yeah.
I think the link we have to make some links, conceptual linkage between outcomes and input. Otherwise, the planning is useless.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We do have to make some clear assumptions.
I think you have to clarify that before you finalize a land use map.
Well, Alan, you know, Yogi Berra said it best when he said making predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. And so we, you know, we will do our best and are doing our best to work with the knowledge that we have and to gather as much of that knowledge as possible. And this is a very important part of the process.
And a lot of that knowledge relates to public policy, both at the local, federal and state levels. And we just have no idea what that's going to be. How much support, what sectors are going to get supported? Are they sectors that are relevant to Connecticut? How do we make Connecticut relevant? You know, assuming different models of change. I don't see it.
So Alan, I wanted to, so you're right. You brought this issue up a number of times, and I have been thinking about what does the COVID appendix look like? Because you're absolutely, because not only do we have a lot of uncertainty because we have a change in administration in Washington and what we don't know, our economy is changing, technology is changing, and COVID has really changed our lifestyles, and we don't know how much of how things were done previously will go back to the way they were, and how much is going to stay remote or by internet, or how much of these are permanent changes. And I've been thinking about how I would write that section as a series of questions and scenarios. But I think there are some prognostications that I personally wouldn't be uncomfortable saying, is talking about the sectors that just from my professional perspective are going to be impacted, and then the issues that are going to be that are currently of great importance and will continue to be, which I think is probably one of our primary infrastructures is going to be internet access.
Yeah.
I see Bill Neal has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. You know, just as you just said, hey, if there's other maps out there that we'd like to get on ours, if we don't say, here's what we want for the future, the people that are looking to see what RiverCOG region wants,
Because that's the only way to define policies that we want to adopt.
Right. But I mean, if we say, let's give up, the population's gonna go down, schools are gonna close, we're gonna regionalize, it's more likely what we'll get. If we say this is what we want is.
Oh, well, you can identify, they're different, those are policy options. And they might work better in certain circumstances and not in others.
I'm an optimist and like to plan for the best. If we plan, if we raise the white flag, we could just like do a 10-page thing.
But
I'm
I
not
think,
saying-
this is Mary.
Go ahead,
I
Mary.
think too that some of our decisions, and I think expansion of internet and increasing internet speed is a given, but there are other things that go along with that. So underground utilities would be a huge boon to a region where storms are becoming more and more frequent and more intense. And add to that, if we're putting in underground utilities in our downtown regional centers, then that gives you the opportunity to reshape your parking. Everything leads to another. So I think even if there's only one one decision, as Sam has alluded to, you take one thing like increasing internet access and speed for our more rural parts of our communities, it opens other opportunities that could really reshape our region over the next decade.
Like one policy, which may be more of a sort of a policy for our legislators, is that we have fiber optic in every town as part of the state's fiber optic. But it was built by the private sector. And the idea at the time was the state was investing in fiber optic for education and for public safety. But the idea was because a private vendor was building the fiber optic network, that the cost of that vendor pulling additional fiber through those conduits or pathways was minimal, and that they would do it. And in effect, it would be bringing fiber to a lot of our communities. It didn't happen that way. And so that's something which it's still very expensive in a lot of our communities to bring fiber optic internet to businesses, and very much we have very little to home. So those are so that's something which, of course, on a regional level, we have a limited ability to do, but it's more of a lobbying issue. But it's something that's clear that needs to be a priority for all of our towns. And working together, that's something that our legislators can help address.
Well, the question, but the question that affects the question's fundamental issues, like town centers.
Yeah.
I mean, are they going to be as relevant with the technical? You know, we have a good idea about the pace of technological change, but we don't know whether that the role of the public sector, what the extent and the nature of the role of the public sector versus private sector changes. I mean, all these things are they're 10 and they are now 10-year issues. We can't think much further than that.
You know, my vision of what our town centers are, it is going to be more the community. It's going to be community space. It's going to be recreation space. It's going to be social space. Brick and mortar retail, unless you're a specialty or you're artistic or have some sort of specialness to you, potentially through the experience, you're going to struggle selling any sort of commodities when they can be bought for less on the internet. Food, of course, is a big exception because food is better fresh than it is shipped many days old. But besides that, I see town centers of having continuing to have a strong community role, and maybe we'll see the continued shrinkage of retail and services, or some types of services. You know, we've seen banks close their branches. We have seen retail stores close. We need to reimagine these as community spaces because people still want to go places where there are other people.
And I think too, Sam, the move to affordable housing means more housing on less acreage. And then those residents are going to need public spaces as their outdoor space. And so it really, if we choose the correct location for our affordable housing, we can really reinvigorate our downtowns.
Yeah. And you know, and COVID will come to an end and people will want to gather again, whether it be for public events, socializing, all those different things. And we've seen this in just, you know, the way the move trends in retail, but also in some of the some services, like obviously personal services. You'll never get your hair dressed a hairdresser on the internet. But other services, you know, have moved more, can move more to the internet. But the need for community interaction spaces and that place to go for a walk and run into people and maybe grab an ice cream or a coffee. I think so I think we need to come to terms with how people's lives have changed and how they interact with the built environment and their town and their places,
and whether that direction will continue.
Right. I think that just human nature is that people, unless you know, something like COVID persists for an extended period of time, which God forbid, I really hope doesn't. I don't see why we wouldn't go back to a more normal social community. I sincerely hope we do.
I agree, but but there are a lot of virtual communities.
That is true. Yeah.
Increasingly.
And it's yet to be seen. You know, kids who are much more comfortable in virtual environments. What will they? How will they react? But Megan is reminding me that we told people an hour, so I'm going to stop talking and let other people comments or questions to bring up anything that we haven't.
It's already 7 o'clock. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I know we want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if you have oh, Beth, go ahead, Beth. Unmute yourself first.
It's just something to think about, and maybe at the next meeting, you can let us know. But I read today that Connecticut has committed to the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And when we're considering the transportation sector and how we get around, I'm wondering how much the governor's commitment to this should play a role as we finish up our regional plan of conservation and development, and that we keep some of those parameters in mind.
I think that's a good question. We have for example, one of the biggest things for transit is our regional transit study, which we just wrapped up, which provides a roadmap for merging our two bus companies, Middletown Area Transit with Ninetown Transit, and making investments in transit. But COVID has massively impacted ridership in transit across the country. Middletown Area Transit's ridership actually has recovered. Majority of its riders. Estuary is still pretty badly impacted. I'd like to take a look at what came out of the governor's office today. I didn't see that, but I was focused on this and other things. So Beth, if you have that, please send it to me and Megan to take a look at. I think generally transportation, we've heard a lot about, obviously non-motorized transportation, cycling and pedestrian transportation. That's of course important to those town centers and vitality. But we also need to be thinking about any major traffic issues or the DOT does have a long range plan to widen I-95 to 3 lanes in both directions. Those plans right now, they're prioritizing the section between Old Saybrook and New London right now. So that's really from the Baldwin Bridge, the Pearl Harbor Bridge, not the Pearl Harbor Bridge, the Gold Star Bridge, New London. But that could potentially have impacts in the future to those shoreline towns. And of course, we have the red lights on Route 9 in downtown Middletown, which of course is one of the more. It'll be a big project, probably the biggest project when it comes to expressways in our region. Because I don't see the widening of 95 happening anytime soon. Because it's going to be very expensive. Whereas Route 9 is a little bit less expensive, but we'll see how that process plays out. So, but thank you. Please send it to us.
I just did. I sent it to both
Great.
of you. Okay.
Excellent. All right. Any other comments before we move on and we speak up or raise your hand virtually? And of course, you can always reach out to any of us. All right. So let's continue on. Go ahead, Megan.
Okay, so this is another refresher for those of you who have been at multiple of our meetings, so please bear with me. Here is a breakdown of the anticipated timeline for the RPOCD. We kicked off in 2019 and we anticipate completion in spring of 2021. We're in phase 4 of the process at the regional thematic meetings, which is in the 4th column, first line. And then following the regional thematic meetings, we have one left, which is January 5th. We will be posting the draft RPOCD on our website for public comment. And that's, again, RiverCOGregionalplan.org. So check the website for access to draft documents and to provide your thoughts and comments. And as always, there are lots of ways for you to get involved. This includes visiting the website, RiverCOGregionalplan.org, signing up for email notifications, again, making us go viral, sharing all of our presentations with everybody you know, and most importantly, continuing to join us at these workshops. We really do appreciate it.
And I will take over, just remind those people who are joined us for the first time. This is a list of our regional planning committee members, so please find your local RPC members. And if you go to the next slide, we have contact email addresses for each pair, member and an alternate. So please feel free to contact them. We also, if you go back to the previous slide, we have a couple vacancies. So anyone Middlefield, we have vacancies. We also have a vacancy for an alternate for Portland. So if any of you are interested, please contact us. Also a vacancy for an alternate for so, and I think Old Lyme, we have vacancies there too. So please come forward if you know anyone or you want to volunteer to be part of the steering committee for this project. All right. Next, remember RiverCOG regionalplan.org. And next slide. And I just want to remind everyone that we have the next workshop is going to be January 5th. We will be rolling out the mapping tool for you and to use. So your homework between now and then, if you go to the next slide, I'll just remind you to be thinking about what would a future land use map for our regional plan look like? What do you hope to achieve as part of this map? I also think that some of the comments that Alan brought up about what assumptions and what scenarios I think about assumptions and scenarios, because that's very important as we think about this and come up with drafts and finalize a map. Bring it up with your friends, family, or neighbors from a nice safe distance, and I recommend consulting with all those any document that you think might be useful in this discussion. Like I'm glad that Humphrey brought up the Autobahn plan. I think that any documents or organizations that you're involved in that you think should be taken into consideration, please take a look at them, send them our way, and I think those will be interesting and helpful inputs as we distill this down and come up with our draft plan. So, and finally, after this is completed, I will be posting this to our website. So you'll be able to find a link there. And I think that's it, right? All right.
So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you all have a safe and happy holiday. And we look forward to meeting with you after the holidays. But the other thing is you may want to get your towns, boards, committees, commissions, and agencies or organizations that you work with together to participate in reviewing the maps for following the next presentation.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today, or tonight, I mean, and happy holidays, happy New Year. We'll see you in 2021. Any last questions or comments before we say goodnight? All right. With that, I wish you all well and happy and healthy 2021.
Thank you very much.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.